Real talk, raw feelings. You're listening to If I'm Being Honest, a podcast by Attunigrate. I'm Nishani, therapist, founder, and forever a work in progress.
And I'm Himgauri, Gigi to my friends, graphic designer, a creative soul, and a fellow big leap taker.
Same. So we figured, why not hit record while we do it? This podcast is all about the real stuff: mental health, big life changes, identity shifts, burnout, healing, all the things we don't talk about enough.
So, yeah, whether you are spiraling a little, thriving a little, or somewhere in between.
You're in the right place.
So, let's dive in.
In the 21st century, it seems like we have a tendency to avoid having conversations about the real experiences we have on an everyday basis. Maybe that's because we think other people are not ready to hear it, or it feels like being authentic. Like, I'm a mental health professional and I talk about mental health issues almost every day with my clients. But when it comes to outside of a therapy room, it's almost difficult for people to talk about this because it's just not something we are encouraged to do anymore. And both of us come from very different backgrounds where there's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
community. There's a lot more, I mean, maybe a little too much community in our cultures where we tend to get too involved in each other's business. However, now both of us are here. I know Gigi is somebody who just moved to the United States. I have been here for the past 12 plus years, and I have realized just how isolating people feel here,
Mm-hmm.
and how, as I've assimilated to this culture, even I have noticed that I've moved away from that community mindset that I grew up experiencing. And here we have Gigi bringing in a fresh pair of eyes, and just kind of lending her perspective on what it's like to assimilate into this culture from her experience. And the purpose of this podcast is to encourage more of these real conversations, to make sure that we are putting it out there, being vulnerable, and making sure that we create a collective, a community that will help us all reintegrate some of the ways that we as humans thrive, which is together, not
Exactly.
alone.
And at the end, the purpose of this podcast is you start finding your people, you start having these real conversations. Nobody is perfect,
Exactly.
but that's what we want to encourage. Probably they're going through something, but if you encourage a conversation and talk when you see them low, that is going to make somebody's day.
And yeah, in addition to the two of us having starting this podcast series, something that we plan to do is invite other guests and have different types of people from all walks of life
Mm-hmm.
join us and have conversations about how they maneuver and experience their own mental health, how they are confronting the stigma, whether that means they're using it in their own profession, in their personal life, with their families, basically just figuring out how we all balance work, a personal life, and our mental health in the.
Yes, that like there is no one thing that you're winning at. If you're winning at work, probably somewhere you're not taking care of your personal life, or like it's always going to be a juggle, and it's meant to be that way.
Yeah.
Um,
And before we start introducing other people, we figured we would start connecting with you guys directly and sharing our story about how we have been encountering mental health, personal
mhm.
experiences, and like confronting the stigma. So I've been in the world of mental health since I was probably a tot. I mean, as early as I can remember, I have been somehow listening and tuning into people and being a sounding board for a lot of the adults in my life. And because of that, I was like, I believe I was like hardwired to become a therapist. I just didn't know that at the time because, I didn't have any idea about what this profession even sounded like. And I thought what I wanted to do was psychology. So I kept pursuing psychology thinking that that was my goal. And then I realized psychology was more about testing, and what I really cared about was human connection. And I
Mhm.
really wanted to listen to people. I wanted to make sure that they felt heard, and a lot of people would tell me about the things that are happening in their lives. So this kind of created an environment where I really couldn't talk about my own mental health issues because everybody else was kind of unloading onto me. And it seemed like I was supposed to take on that responsibility of being their anchor rather than me considering, like, what about me? Who do I go and talk to? And
Right.
so that was my experience growing up, was everybody was, sharing their stories with me, and I was somehow the strong person that held that together, and I never felt that it was available to me where I could go talk to someone.
Do you
Um,
think like that motivated, as I understand, like that is your prime motivation of like starting because you became a sounding board, but do you think
right.
like that was the only lead for you to get into the world of mental health, or was there anything else?
So I saw a movie growing up. I still remember this. It's I don't know if you know of Freaky Friday. Have you ever seen it?
Mm,
Um, Lindsay Lohan is in it, and it's like the mom and daughter, they eat this fortune cookie and their bodies switch, and then the daughter has to be the mom and the mom has to be the daughter. Anyways, it's an old movie. I mean, old for a millennial, but anyways, old movie. And when I saw that, I saw the mom. The mom was a psychotherapist and she had a private practice, and she would go and she would talk to these clients. And there was a very small instances where she had this one client that she was working with who seemed very needy and needing to meet with her every day. And so that is what really sparked this interest into mental health. And I realized, like, oh, this is a profession. I could do this. I could do this for a living. And because I was already so good at it at the time, it just seemed, again, I kept being led that way. I was never the one that was interested in like engineering and mathematics or other professions, but somehow I was a great listener and it worked really well in every single relationship that I had in my life. I just happened to be the one that would listen and take on whatever was going on and somehow be able to give something back to the person who was sharing whatever it is that they were going through with me, right? So yeah, I that's kind of like this big motivator that led me in this direction. But as I think about it, because again, the purpose of this podcast is to also talk about how it's been affecting me.
uh-huh.
I forgot that I needed that sounding board, that I deserve to be able to talk about my life and who was listening to me, who could receive the things that I was going through. That happened much later. In fact, it was after I became a therapist officially that I realized I needed my own support. I think
Uh-huh.
that was a way that I kind of avoided taking care of myself, and I was just there for everybody else. Um,
Right.
I made that into a profession, right? So it was great. I was so
Mhm.
good at it. But then I'm like, wait, what about me? And that was kind of tying into the people pleasing tendencies that I was kind of growing up with and how I was programmed to kind of stay in that space.
Exactly.
Uh, yeah, so that's kind of what led me into therapy. And then it also made me realize, like, yo, maybe you need to also think about you. Who do you talk to? How do you take care of yourself? And as
Mhm.
somebody who's always just kind of known the mental health field, I felt I already had the answer. So I'm like, what would I discover if I went to a therapy space that I did not already know? So
Right.
I went about it very differently. I mean, I still, to this day, I prioritize my mental health now more than anything. And that's been something that I've experienced my whole life where everybody saw me as a therapist, but nobody saw me as a human who was also going through things and needed support.
That is so true. Like suddenly, like in my mind, you have humanized the other side of therapist. When I heard your story, it gave me a second side to it. It gave me a part
Mm,
that says that yes, they're humans. They also need a sounding board because that is what a community is. You just it can't be like a one-way street, right? In any
exactly.
place. Though it is a profession, it is always a lot of like give and take. But
Mm,
I don't know, with this profession, like a lot of people just think that it's a lot of like just give me everything in your space, like make me feel better. I don't know if I'm saying things right, but like this is what I feel about like therapy, because people feel like, oh, I've paid you money, you've heard me, fix me. But no,
yes.
like it needs to come from within, right? Like you need to be open to receiving what they are saying. For the
Yeah. No, I think that's totally valid. In fact, I'm sure in our other series, Therapy for Therapists, this is something we will talk about pretty much the entire time, just because we need to take away the stigma that somehow therapists are capable of just being superwoman, supermen, and
exactly.
superhuman in
Mm,
some manner. And that's not the case. We're all human. We're all just learning how to exist. And we often also go through our own dilemmas in life and battles and challenges. And somehow we have to figure it out. But Anyways, what about you? Tell me about how you walked into this.
So, just a little bit of background about me. I'm a graphic designer and I love what I do. Just to encourage a little bit more, how I got into the space of mental health is because the moment I realized that mentally I was not okay at one point in my life and I needed to kind of explore. And at that point, I was working literally all day. There was no time for personal relations, there was no time for hobbies, there was no time for anything, right? Like from morning 9 to night 10, I don't know, it was
Mm,
more than 12 hours, 13 hours, weekends, everything you talk about. And there was no balance. And then at one point, one of my friend went to an hypnotherapist, and that's how my journey started to
mm,
this world of mental health. And at that point, if you ask me, there was nothing wrong with me. I was perfectly fine. I was doing great. But then when
yeah.
I knocked at that door is when I realized that yes, I need all of those things.
Mm,
I do look perfect for the outside world. If you look at me at that point, if you looked at me at that point, I was a person who was doing everything, right? Like I was at
mm,
that point a superwoman, like, oh, just working her ass off, like getting everything done.
yeah.
Everything is on schedule, everything is on point. I used to go party after work, but then I was
Yeah.
mentally burning out. Physically,
Mm,
I was burning out, but I never addressed that because, hey, we are taught that we need to keep going, going, going. And that's how, right? Like nobody tells you to take a break, pause, learn, have hobbies.
right.
And then when I started exploring that, like the first few times I went to an hypnotherapist, and that's how I got. But then, yes, that works with your spiritual part of everything.
Mm,
And when I decided that I needed more challenges and more acceptance in my day to
yeah.
day, when that's when I started like looking for a counselor, and I found somebody really great. And when I worked with them, is when I realized that you need your day to day acceptance also, right? Like everything was working fine with me, but then you
Right.
do some things wherein you need to challenge your brain, and that's when I got more interested in the world of mental health. I
Mm,
tend to read more. I tend to listen to a lot of podcasts because I always thought I don't know how I'm going to combine what I do with mental health.
mm,
Something that I would really got passionate about because a lot of people in front of me, I
yeah.
knew that they needed help. But telling them that they needed help is like kind of telling them that, hey, you're mad and you need to go see someone.
Right.
I want to encourage those conversations. I'm not calling you mad. I'm just asking you
Yeah.
to be able to structure your thoughts in a better way.
Mm,
Release your
mm,
mental load is what I was telling them. It's like you see somebody's cupboard a little bit messy, you tell them, hey, can I help you, arrange it better? It's literally that. There are too many things that are happening up there. I mean, there's
yeah.
somebody who is a professional in this thing, and they're just going to help you filter it out and keep the things that you need. This was something that you cannot tell people, and you cannot have these conversations. And I
Yeah.
feel like this is something that is definitely needed. And when I came here, I got that a lot from you because when I moved here with zero friends, I moved
Yeah.
here to be with my husband. Literally, like only his friends became my friends, right? Knowing my comfort for whatever years I knew before, and coming here and then like learning how each one is, and then kind of expressing yourself. And then I land up to you, and then you're just like, hey, listen, whatever you're thinking about, I know it is right. And I know that works for us. I know that's right. And finally I found that piece that I think I've been looking for really long, right? Like somebody who resonates with everything that you say, right? Like
Mm,
we have had our life in India that, or Sri Lanka, that was a little different than what we are leading our life today. Baggage is like a big word, but they do have the experiences that we need to balance it out. And I don't know, like that is something that I found in you. And that's where this podcast was born.
yeah.
Like we need to make this conversation more palatable to everyone.
Yeah.
Conversations that we need to have with our friends who we meet.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's how we started this.
Absolutely. And, as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing that I wanted to identify us as like we're high achieving women. And that's a lot of people that I have met, especially from our backgrounds. We were like hardwired to keep going.
Right.
And something I say often is like, we're on this hamster wheel, and like we forget that we can step outside of that wheel at any point and
Yes.
just slow down for a second to prioritize rest. And to be perfectly honest, I am actually still working on that. As a business owner, as somebody who started home therapy practice, like I'm working on prioritizing rest, because every time I have done that, I show up for myself so much better. I show up for my business 10 times stronger. And in the past, I operated from this mindset where I had to keep going, chugging along. I mean, my father will to this day expect me to somehow start my day at 7 a.m. and not clock out till 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. And it bothers him that I make my own hours, that I prioritize rest and I put that into my schedule. Because for him, it was such a different reality. And that's what shaped both of us, right? Our parents kind of shaped that reality.
Not a very boomer mindset to have that. I think we learned how to adapt to a newer lifestyle of making our own hours. But initially, we did work the corporate hours as well, right? Like we
Yeah.
started with that and then
Yes.
ourselves here. So I completely understand when, like, yeah, same thing with my dad as well.
To your point, like how when you moved here, you took this gigantic leap of faith, trusting in your partner, right? Your husband, and saying like, okay, I'm gonna dive in. He's comfortable here. He's from here. He's familiar with this environment. He's developed relationships with people. And so I know what it felt like for me to show up as a student and have to like work out that dynamic of trying to fit in. So in a way, I'm observing you, and that's probably why we connected so quickly when we first met, because there's literally a language that I have spoken. I've had to figure it out, and now here I am observing somebody else having
Yes.
to do it for themselves, and that makes me want to jump in and say like, okay, you're not alone in this. Like you've got people, and let's do this together. And in fact, when I found out about your design work, and when I found out about how all of your life experiences have shaped you to who you are today, it shows up in your work. Like you're good at setting boundaries. You know where your limits are. You can think outside the box. You have helped my business expand its marketing reach by so much more that I could imagine, because it's just not my cup of tea. Like it's just not where I thrive. And somehow here you come along and you're bringing in this new pair of eyes, this fresh perspective, and you're going, Nishani, let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. And I'm hearing you say like, I'm helping you with your mental health, but you're helping me with like everything else. So I'm like, I'll take that. I will carry that for as long as we need, because that's us both completing each other's needs without actually needing to say it out loud. Somehow it just works, and we can resonate with each other more frequently. And maybe that's something we might experience with other people that we meet, right?
True. And yes, that makes that genuinely I do have a big smile on my face right now, and thank you so much for these kind words, because meeting with people like you made it easier, I'm going to say. Everybody was very open to understanding where I came from, and I think that eased in a lot of these things.
Hmm.
You mentioned about me taking like a big leap of faith, and yes, I had to, right? Like at some
Yeah.
point I knew I found my person, but there were two different countries, two different parts of the world. Like we had to find a middle ground.
Hmm.
And that's when we, through our conversations, we realized that, okay, US is a place that we need to be, and that's where I'm going to move. And prior to that, the brown people, the settled life that they call, right? Like you have your own place, you have your own car. I had everything that was there, right?
Yeah.
Uprooting yourself completely. But again, I would say that lot of faith from my husband. It was a lot of communication with him that gave me that strength, and
Mm,
a lot of conversations about how is this going to look like. A lot of
mm,
acceptance um, from where my mental health was at that time, because moving is
yeah.
not easy, right? I went to people because I was like, yes, I know I want to go there, but it's not letting me. So I used to
Mm,
have, what are the worst case situations that you're going to go through? What is it that you will have to accept? Like I'll have to accept the
mm,
fact I wouldn't have my friends to meet me every time something went down because there's going to be
Yeah.
distance, like the acceptance. Luckily, one of my friend moved to Canada, so she came into my time zone, not in the same country, but a similar time zone. I think that was one of my
Right.
saving grace. Um, Conversations with people back home kept me grounded, and then the fact of meeting people, like I had this conversation with my husband that, hey, listen, for till I find my crew, you are going to be my person. You're
Right.
not gonna like it, but the day that you feel overwhelmed, let me know. Because for
Mm.
everything, I was dependent on him, right? A person who's brought up here or like grown up here, you do have your friends, you do have your people that you go to, you
Yeah.
have community. But
Right.
I was very open about this conversation that I only have you and I'm only going to look up to you. And trust me, for at least 6 months, he never said anything about any literally, like, I was being a big pain sometimes or like, dealing with everything. And he had no complaint. Like he was
Mm.
as he could be. Coming in, I literally came up with everything. Like literally, it was a boy's apartment turning it into a home. Like,
Yeah.
and then coming up with my guns blazing. But yes, like I would say I got a lot of my strength from him. And there were things that happened when I moved. I don't know how my friends took it back then, but some of them stayed with me, some of them just
Mm.
decided not to be in touch. And I accepted that, right? Like I cannot push myself onto them. And when I decided to accept that fact, it also kind of strained my new relationships here because I was extremely cautious then.
Yeah.
Then somehow we met, and I think that eased out a little bit more. And then I realized, no, it's not like that. It's accepting the fact where you are at, and then it's fine. You can have your new relations. You
Yeah.
can meet new people. Like they will know another side of you, and that is how it is, right? Like
Mm.
meeting people, understanding everything. Because now my friends or my peers or my colleagues who were there for me up until like last year that I moved, and
Yeah.
now I do have to make space and understand with the new life here. And those
Mm.
experiences and understanding I'm only going to get with people who have lived here.
Yeah.
So I mean, a blend of everything. I feel like it was, yes, the move was difficult, I'm not going to lie. I moved, and it was really difficult because I think before that, a year, or I'm going to say more, 9 months, I was on an autopilot, right? Like I
Yeah.
need to do it because leaving your home country is different than leaving another country where
Yeah.
you can never go back to that normal. You
Mm.
can never go back to that comfort because yes, I know when I go back to India, I go back to my home, but I left that place in 2011, which was 14 years back. But then
Yeah.
I know I still have that place, right? Like whenever I go
Yes.
back, I know that. But like when I was leaving Dubai, I knew that the place that I created my as my home and for my stuff that you talk about, I had to get rid of everything. And that move was very different. The
Yeah.
acceptance was very different that it is okay, it is fine. And it was an everyday conversation, right? Like every passing day you realize, oh, this is one less day in Dubai, oh, this is another less.
Mm.
And but then again, there was excitement of moving here with my husband. So I'm like, oh, but it's other way, right? There was always
Right.
balance. I don't know how to
Exactly.
explain that in right words, but yeah, like you're happy but then you're sad because you're leaving something that you know. So
Yeah. It's almost like it's a catch-22, right? You have on the one hand this excitement about this new venture, but it's an unknown, right? Because it's brand new territory for you. And it's funny, I didn't even realize, but you left India around the same time I left Sri Lanka, which is 2011, right?
yes,
And so we've been away from home. And something you shared was like, now home does not look the same anymore. The way that we left it, I still remember it that way, but every time I go to visit, I'm like, oh, things have changed, things have evolved. I just haven't been around to evolve with that culture, with that community. And now I'm like kind of straddling. There's like two different places. And you have India, then Dubai, and now the US.
now the US. Yes.
Right. And so what you were talking about is why we're having this conversation and why we're doing this podcast, right? Because the reality of mental health isn't always black and white. Things aren't that simple. You
Yes.
have these moments where you have anxiety. I was hearing you saying like you were overthinking and you were trying to plan ahead and come up with all kinds of ways of how do you make sure that this doesn't happen? How do you make sure that you don't accidentally fall in hit your face on the ground, you know? Like there's just all these things that you're trying to manage while also being excited about being married and like having a partner and being like, "Yay, this is great. I want this." But what about this unknown, this territory that I have not ventured
Mhm.
yet? And something you had mentioned to me while we were talking about it earlier was how you had discovered your own strength in your ability to figure out what to
Yeah.
do and somehow manage and survive,
Yeah.
right? So to your point, the
I,
early,
I think I'm going to say it's more like I get that feeling from you also that you are that person is like you're thrown into it. It's either you swim or you drown. And we have always chosen to swim to keep ourselves afloat, find the strength again, and find yourself out of that pool,
yeah,
right? Like you know that you need to get out of that place. And I think that is the biggest motivator because the acceptance of like, everything is not going to stay same. Like today we are in
mm,
Michigan, today we are here, today everything is perfect, but tomorrow we might have to move somewhere else. And
yeah,
yes, it is okay that your normal is not going to look like this every single day of rest of your life. When you accept that, I think
mhm,
it becomes just 10x easier because then you're open to a lot of possibilities, right? Like you're not shutting a lot of doors. It was easier for me to say that, hey, I have a very cushiony life in Dubai. I don't want to do this. Either you move here where you do not have what you do. I don't want to move because everything looks perfect for me. I get everything done for me. So I don't want to do this. I don't want to move to a new country. I don't want to do this. But then I would lose out on a chance, which is a lifetime of happiness with an individual, right? Like at the end,
mhm,
you want to find your person. You want to
yeah,
live your life with a person. So the choice was, do I have only the cushion life and be single all my life? Or
mm,
do I find this space and like work with someone, look, go find these new opportunities? Like for all last 13 years in Dubai, I was working. When I was moving jobs also, I there was never a break that was more than a week. And when I
wow,
decided to move, I knew I had to quit everything. I had to restart everything from ground zero. But yeah, like I was just having a conversation with my husband today, and that's when I realized that the moment I was at peace with the pause in my life, things were okay. The moment
mm,
I'm at unease, right? Like everybody goes through a phase, but like I'm going to say that this phase gave me tessellations. This
mm,
phase gave me a lot of understanding about myself. I was in the corporate world. I was more of like, oh, this needs to be done and it will be done this way. But now I get
yeah,
calls on my own strengths. And discovering that part of my life is something new to me. I am actually thriving from this part. Like, I think I've had this conversation. Thank you so much for giving me this branding project, like basically rebranding Navatherapy to Attunigrate and then
yeah,
opening up possibilities. I mean, that gave me a lot of clarity. I think it came to me at the right time. It came to me at the space where I needed it the most. Like 13 years, just like hardcore work.
yeah.
And then now just suddenly like, hey, there is more to life.
Exactly. It's almost like it's coming back to the simple things rather
Yes.
than living in that survival of like you have to go and always function at and this idea of perfectionism. It seems like both of us have had to learn how to move away from perfectionism because there is no such thing. And somehow in the corporate world that we both belong to, we went through that up to a point of burnout. I mean, I experienced burnout very early in my career as a therapist that made me realize what is the point of a busy life if by the end of it, all I have is a dollar amount in a bank account? What am I supposed to do with that? And even that was not very, that's not really good for therapists. If anybody's listening to this who's a therapist, I mean, you have a master's degree, some even a PhD, and you start off at the bare minimum and somehow that's supposed to sustain you. You work endless hours, you're a sponge for other people. And so, how do we even find a balance, right? So, here you are sharing about how your story has been transitioning out of corporate, out of this busy 13 plus hours. I remember you telling me that you had to like sleep with your phone right next to you, with the laptop by your side, because your company expected you to be available 24/7.
Yeah, because it was COVID at that time.
Right.
And so People work different hours and it's fine on a normal working day, right? Like you're not expected. But COVID times, where are you going?
Yeah.
You're not leaving anywhere. You're at a house. You are next to your laptop, and that's what was expected from all
Exactly.
of us. I mean,
Yeah.
is it a bit ridiculous? Yes, I do have some trauma from there. And, as and when we talk about things, things are going to show up.
Yeah.
And I'll be talking about it a little bit more because that kind of helped me to segregate and be like where I needed to stop. And then I kind of made a move during COVID itself to another place. And where I was working the next, I think everybody changed my perspective to corporate a little. It's
Mm.
not every corporate or every agency works the same way. My manager encouraged the conversation of what are you doing after work? You do not have hobbies. You need to go do this. You need to, and trust me, I
Wow.
found badminton in that. And badminton gave me those 2 hours of my brain not thinking of anything, but me
Mm.
100% being present in that place. Like it worked on a skill that I was trying to learn before. And I really liked it. And then found out a lot of other things that I can do. I hadn't spare time. And literally, I feel my relation with my husband right now is only because I moved that to another place. I had the time and the energy to invest in long distance.
Mm.
Had that
Mhm.
space to give our relationship that scope to grow. Because if I was busy and preoccupied with something and my mind didn't have this capacity to grasp what you were saying, because
Yeah.
again, like, it's a lot of patience that we both had to show initially, right? Like it's
Mm.
a person that you don't know. How much are you going to talk about it? How much are you going to get into this? So
Yeah.
having a perfect balance is what I learned in my last 3 years in Dubai. Because when I got that balance, everything in my life just became easier, right? Like it was not like
Yeah.
I was fighting to sustain something, right?
Yeah.
One thing put me down, there was other thing that kept me sustained. Like before if something happened bad at work, it would affect my personal life straight up because my work was priority.
Mm.
And as you mentioned, right, that is a very like a mentality of like you need to do this because that's how you're going to get recognition, that's how you're going to survive. The
Yeah.
way I decided to look at myself and that changed, things followed.
Mm.
A lot of pause. It's not like, oh, today I decide to change everything, tomorrow it comes to, it is a
Yeah.
process. In this
Yeah.
world where you get your answers in 3 seconds from an AI,
AI.
you want,
Mm.
that is not how life is. And when you
Mm.
accept that, you learn to be okay with a lot of things in life.
Number one, I heard you say like something just to recap some of the things that I thought were really some of the takeaways that I'm sitting with is you realize that you were spiraling at a certain point, and while it was not clear to you what exactly the cause of that was, you felt like it was time for you to like reach out and ask for help. And
Yes.
you considered like, let me try this professional outlook in hypnotherapy. And that opened the door into the world of mental health that in your lifetime hadn't been introduced to you, because in our cultures it's just phrased as that's just how it is, that's just life, you just keep going, and nobody ever slows down to say like it's okay to struggle with some of these things that are happening in your life, and it's okay for you to have moments where you may be excited for what's happening while you're also frightened and you're scared about these new ventures.
I'm
And
still
then
in a little at that point when I had this conversation with some people around me saying that, hey, I'm pursuing hypnotherapy. Somebody came and told me, I'm happy to hear that you have disposable income to do that. And
ooh,
I'm like,
yeah,
really at that point, hearing something like that. But there was something in me that said, you don't have to stop.
yeah, yeah,
Was it cheap? No, it wasn't cheap. Like, that's what when you mentioned people around you don't pursue it that way, right? Like, nobody
hmm,
was okay with the conversation initially
yeah,
about, right, getting into this because people looked at it, oh, you have spare money to spend on it. I'm like, no, I don't. It's something
right,
I want for myself, right? Like I wanted to get
exactly.
out of that rut. And the first time
Yeah,
I went also, I never thought that my life is going to change this way.
yeah, yeah. And and to your point about how people can be judgmental or pose these questions or statements out there to make you question, this was you prioritizing yourself, right? For once in your life, you're going, you know what? If I can go get myself new clothes, new shoes, why not also spend a little bit of money to work with someone who may be able to open up doors? And to your point, it created a pathway for you to start setting a foundation, a healthier relationship with yourself that then led you to figuring out how to move away from a toxic workplace, because then you discovered, hey, by the way, I deserve more and I
Mhm.
should consider what that looks like. And then you ended up finding a place and a boss, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have time to dedicate to myself, which then opened up the door for you having time to work on your own relationship with yourself, which led to you meeting your husband, your now husband,
Yes.
right? It's like so many things have transpired since you
Mhm.
chose to prioritize. The dollar amount is, can you really quantify this amount of freedom now in that experience, right? Like, how do you put a dollar amount on that now?
That is so true. You can't, right? Like I started my journey in 2019. Here we're in 2025. I feel a lot more evolved, a lot more in tune with myself, I'm gonna say.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Because my move here also in between, I remember having this conversation with you. I said, I don't know why, but I don't feel like doing this. And you're like, it's fine. Take your time,
Yeah.
understand how you're feeling it, and then proceed. And that is something that was new, right? Like because you don't have these conversations with someone because nobody
Mm,
wants to let you kind of take a pause. But I feel like a lot of these conversations, or someone who is licensed or someone who is studied and can guide you, walk through it, somehow opens the doors that you need to kind of reflect onto yourself. What if it doesn't work out? Because
mm,
tapping to a zero here and moving to another country, just trusting in
yeah.
one man.
Yeah.
And that was my deepest fear,
Yeah.
right? And then she just told me one sentence. Have you done it because your parents gave it to you on a golden platter? I said, no. Do you believe in yourself? I said, yes. She's like, yes, you'll find out your way. At that point, when something like that has to happen,
Mm,
today you can't plan for tomorrow's worst thing. When that happens, your circumstances, your things are going to be different, and you will know how to lead out of it. And I think that was my biggest takeaway from that. And I think things changed after that, right? Like my acceptance grew a lot towards how I was looking at move. What did that mean to me? Moving here, looking at friends here, right? Like what that
yeah.
for me changed in that one conversation.
Hmm.
Something that
Wow.
people think that everybody knows, like I know myself better than anybody else.
Yeah. One of our friends calls it, a maintenance of the
Yes.
mind, like, working on the mind and just doing some maintenance, just like you would take care of a car, like an engine, right? Work on the
Hmm.
brain and do some work every now and then. And it's not it's not that, either one of us is suggesting that everybody needs to get help. It's that, how do you step outside of a comfort zone? Maybe that means you start with friends and family. Maybe that means you start consider a therapist, a
Yes.
hypnotherapist, or a coach, or some professional that might lend a perspective that you're not familiar with, or you're not really going to see. I often say to people as a therapist, if I taught you what the color white is for the first time, let's say you didn't know colors and you learned about white. Now all of a sudden, everywhere you go, guess what? You might start noticing that color everywhere, right?
That is so true.
So if when you go to therapy, let's say you didn't know anything about color or the world of color, because apparently there are some creatures who cannot see all
Hmm.
the colors that we are able to see as humans, right? So imagine all of a sudden a dog, for example, because I believe they have limited color views, they have very specific colors that they see. All of a sudden they get to see, they learn about something new gets downloaded into their brain.
Hmm.
It's possible that you can't unsee it. Once you learn it, it's very difficult to unsee. So once you encounter the busy life, you realize you're in a loop, or you realize you're a hamster on a wheel, or you're starting to be burnt out, and you're kind of bleeding on to the world around you because you're not taking care of your own self. And then
True.
you start learning about it, like, you can't unsee it. I have clients who tell me that. I have experienced that. I'm like, wow, it's difficult for me to ignore this because my brain has learned something. And that's something friends, family, therapists, a professional could do for you,
That is very true.
right? Discussing how to open up is why we're here, because we're trying to have we're trying to highlight the importance of a support system. And that can look like a lot of different things. And because of you opening up, you have discovered things that you would have never found out. And I'm not sure if you could have figured this out just by reading a book, although that's also another place you can go to for support.
But okay, reading a book, yes, I completely understand. But when you have another individual sitting in front of you, it creates a different impact. Yes, reading gives you a certain space, but having a conversation gives you more, right?
Mm,
I can read what a hug does to you, but I can only feel a
mm,
hug when I get it from someone. It's
yeah.
that way, right? I can read a lot of these things, but when I tell you something, the way I'm talking, my passion in it, and my stress of, right, hey,
Yeah.
uh, this needs to be served in a certain way to you. And for everybody, the plate doesn't always look the same. So when it gets served to you in a certain way, I think it's more palatable to everyone.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And that's something we had talked about on a road trip the other couple of weeks ago, where the conversation came up about AI and how people use AI to serve this. And yeah, while it may be a quick fix, I mean, I've certainly enjoyed using AI when I've had to do some, thinking and writing and correcting the way that I write something. And it's been very helpful. But I've even received from people feedback that they have gone to AI to ask for mental health support, to talk to AI about what they're going through and ask AI to give them feedback. And so this is kind of why we're here. We want to kind of bring up this point of like, we are moving further and further away from each other, and that's not really where we as humans thrive. We work well together, connected, and even if it is an unknown and scary experience to put yourself out there. I mean, we're literally recording a podcast right
Yeah.
now that's going to be live. And for anybody that can listen to this, they might have their own judgments, they might have their own opinions. And that's why we're doing this. We're taking a risk. And let's be honest, we're all work in progress,
Yes.
right? That's kind of the process of life.
That is so, so, so true, because putting yourself out there for the entire world, but because these conversations were between the people that you trust, between the people that you know. And yes, at one point it is great. But as you said, as we had the conversation the other day regarding AI, as we are stepping out from people, as we are moving further and further away, and the technology is taking over, we can't stop these things. But all we can do is encourage people to still come and
Mm,
talk and see how that changes, right? Like that creates a sense of responsibility, that creates a sense of purpose, right? Because
mm,
what we do is we are very like victim mentality, right? Oh, this has only happened to me, I'm the one who is suffering, I have no way to get out, right? Like it's a
mm,
very like inner dialogues. Oh my god, only my life is very difficult, oh my god, only I have troubles. No, there are other people who have worse than what you do in the current situation. um and again, like nobody's problem is big or small. At that point, your problem is the biggest thing. And trust me, you have to give that person that scope that, yes, at this minute, your problem is the biggest problem. If this for the entire world, the problem might be small.
yeah.
But I don't know, right? Like you deal with a lot of these people. You went through your things, right? Like when we had the conversation, just taking things back, like we had a conversation and we were going to work on another therapy and marketing and everything for that. Suddenly one fine day you get up and you're like, by the way, I have this new thing that I'm working on and I want to do a tuning grade. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but then could you like to elaborate a little bit on your mental space at that point? Because that switch and that came from a lot of deeper place in your heart. It came from a lot of the things that you learned with Nava therapy. Again, like Nava
Mm,
therapy is always going to be the start of everything.
yeah. Huh. That's it's interesting that you put it that way because I guess you're right. It's almost like I had to I'm starting with a clean slate. I would like to start with a clean slate, even though everything is going all right with Nava therapy. It's just evolving. As far as my mental state, something when I started Nava therapy, it seemed like it was a great place to start, and I was overthinking about it a lot. about the name. Is it the proper name? Is this okay? And I still remember my partner being like, Nish, like it does not matter. Just start, right? Just get it rolling and you'll figure it out as you go. And he wanted to point out to me, like, all of these companies rebrand all the time, like it's totally possible. But when I, at the end of 2024, I had been sitting with, again, this idea of something more, building something more, wanting to connect with the community a lot more. And it, Navatherapy, while it was supposed to be bringing a safe place for therapists like myself, I
Right.
realized like it's not just about therapists. I'd like to help other people get to a place in their life where they are attuning, because Attunigrate is built out of attunement and integration,
Mhm.
right? So I, in my meditation, is when the word came to me, and it just kind of like was a download. It was like, I don't know, it was just something that just showed up, and I was like, wow, that fits. And then I was like, how did I get there again? And then I got me thinking, I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking about attunement, which is to go inwards, to do some inner work, which is something I have had to do, I just out of necessity. It's not really something that I thought I was going to do. It was not my plan, at least. I didn't think that that was the plan, but it kind of turned into my,
Right. Like, so, like,
mm,
I'm trying to understand, like, from you, like, that journey must have been your
yeah,
own space, like your own thoughts and your own things that you went through to kind of put it out in the world and say, hey, guess what? I'm doing this.
yeah,
Because November, our conversation, there was no thought of it. But then when you came
all
to
of a
this,
sudden.
it was yes. So in
Yeah.
few days, I'm just trying to like tap into that world of like what did you go through and what was it so sudden that you received the message
Mm,
and you're like, poof, here,
yeah.
this is my new goal for 2025.
I mean, it's almost tying into my own spiritual journey and my awakening as a
Hmm.
spiritual person. It seemed like it seemed like the time. It's almost like this year has been or 2024 rather, has been me setting up a foundation, because I have had to do a lot of self-work. It's almost like I had to figure out what my relationship with myself was, because my
Right.
business was all of a sudden the only thing that I had that I was working on. So now
Uh,
the therapy, and then I had to reprogram myself out of things that I learned from being in the corporate world, from the programming that I learned from my parents, from my dad, that we just talked about, that continues to be something he enforces. Is like he wants me to work a certain way, or he expects me to do this. And then I had to step away from all of that noise and say, who am I at the core of all of this? And the
right.
more I tuned into that internal self, it's almost like Attunigrate was this is my brand. Like this is who I am. It's what I've created.
Right.
Now I have something that I can share with the world. It's a tangible thing that I can share, because it's a new word. It's not in the dictionary. I had to create it myself, because that's what I've had to do. So yeah,
Right.
you're right. I mean, since November, when I genuinely came to that word and the change, my vision for my business, all of that came to me in those couple of weeks, which is just, when I think about it now, I'm like, I can't believe I just went with it. But something in the world of business that I have learned is things can change in a moment's notice. And are you ready to pivot? Right. And
Mhm.
that's what I loved about you, because you were ready to pivot with me. You were like, okay, I mean, all right, give me the vision. And I was just like
Yes.
word vomiting. I felt like I'm like this and this and this. And you're like, oh, okay, let's slow that down to one part. Let's start with the therapy part, right? Because at that time, I was also thinking about coaching and transitioning into the world of coaching and speaking, and that's something I'm working towards in this year. However, in December, I didn't know that. On the 31st of December in 2024, I had not seen any of this. I just had an idea, a vision, and a feeling that
Yeah.
this is where I'm supposed to go.
Yeah.
And because I've taken the time to trust in myself, to set the foundation for myself, I was not allowing anybody to challenge it. In fact, I had people giving me comments when I would share the word with them, that they were like, it's too long. It seems unusual. Nobody might understand it. And I'm like, thank you so much for this feedback. I'm going to go ahead anyway. Like, thank you. Duly noted. And I was like, you know what? Forget it. And that's when I realized, like, I've done it. I've surpassed insecurity. I've surpassed this moment of questioning myself. And I was finally able to just show up for myself and say, I believe in this 100%. And
Uh,
all I have to do is keep going, working towards it. Granted, it's been very helpful to have you alongside.
so just a small takeaway from here, because right now it looks, for everybody who looks at it from a complete outside perspective, looks like it just happened in a month span, but nobody knows the in
Mm,
depth of like before what has happened, right? Like starting a successful business with Nava therapy, gaining your confidence,
yeah.
and then transitioning.
Yeah. And I want to share it with other people because if I discovered this, I know that we're all capable of getting to that level of empowered positions within ourselves, right?
Empowering me in the same process, right? Like we started.
Yeah. And to be fair, I'm just realizing we're documenting our journey in the world of business and how we're navigating what it's like to be in a capitalist society, in a patriarchal society as two brown women. And we're like putting a stamp of things that we would not, I mean, our family and our culture would not have seen this coming. I mean, I know my parents definitely didn't. They just didn't know. And here we are setting this huge movement in place, right? So I'm actually, as you were speaking, I was having this moment of realizing, imagine 2 to 3 years from now, I'm gonna listen to this episode and I'm gonna be like, oh my God, this is where we started. This is where
Exactly.
we were, and I love that this is so raw and imperfect in its own way because we are both healing the narrative around how we show up for ourselves, how we show up around the people around us, and we're documenting that. And that's the purpose of this podcast, right? We want everybody to join along and tell us, and maybe even reach out to us and let us know if you want to be on this and talk to us about some of your experiences. Tell us about what you've been through and how you've navigated the
Mhm.
world of, balancing this busy life. What does mental health look like? I I know that in some manner of speaking, we have been aligned, and in the synchronicity of the two of us meeting at
Uh-huh.
this time is just it is going to really push us through to this
Right.
next chapter, right? Because we both have essentially closed out chapters of our
Right.
lives, and we're starting, I would like to call it a new season, right?
Hmm.
We're essentially walking into this new season where we're going to show up more authentically. We're
Yes.
just going to be real. We're going to have those conversations. We're going to introduce new voices into this podcast. We're going to make sure that it's not just the two of us talking about our life, but we're also connecting with other people in our community and figuring out like how can we all work on this together? And
Hmm.
therefore we're building this relationship and this foundation.
Yes. In
Mm,
the day of AI, we want people to have conversation with another person.
yeah,
So that is the dialogue that we would want to generate at the end of it.
I love it. Okay. And again, our famous slogan here, right? Let's be honest. We're
Yes.
all a work in progress.
Yes. If you have made it this far, thank you for hanging out with us. Hope we have made you feel a little more seen.
This is, if I'm being honest, we're not promising perfection, but we are showing up as we are. Until next time, stay real, stay honest.